Thank you everybody for coming here tonight. Before starting today, I'd like to give you a brief introduction to the Campus Housing Symposium. The restrooms, you know it's an important thing, are located next to the elevators, to your right when you leave this room. There's also a list of coffee shops and places to buy food in your folder, and there is a gallery on the second floor which is showing work by Martin Bradley. Around the room today, there are different posters on easels with different questions, and please feel free to write out more questions or comments, anything that come to your mind during the symposium. Some of our volunteers will be posting on Facebook and Twitter, and so can you, but I will encourage you to keep your phone silent during the time of the lectures. This afternoon, we're glad to introduce you to our first speaker, FredWilson, an internationally renowned artist who works in a wide range of media, including glass, installation, and prints. He has won the MacArthur Award and has represented the United States in the Venice Biennale. He is here today to talk about his life and work. Thank you and welcome, FredWilson.
I have a regular art background, studied art as an undergraduate. But to support myself, I'm from New York City, I worked in various museums. Excuse me, I just had some Diet Coke and I was afraid this would happen. I wasn't drinking. I worked at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Education Department. I worked at the American Museum of Natural History in the Education Department. Let's see, now here we go, let's see what happens. Thank God. And I worked in other museums. I worked at MoMA for a brief moment, moving artwork around, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was particularly working at the Museum of Natural History and the Met at the same time, sometimes going between the buildings in the same day, installing or teaching. I began to, because they're both these museums across Central Park, and they're both Beaux-Arts structures. They both house cultures of world cultures. However, how they talk about them and how they display them and how people interact with them is very different from one museum to the other. And I noticed that just because I was working in both places, and as an artist, as a museum goer, as a staff member, having all these different roles, I began to sort of see how different one sees the museum from all these different vantage points. And I also thought there was something unusual going on with these places. This, Museum of Natural History at that time was a big, dark Beaux-Arts space, and you had lots of children running around. In the Met, the big light-filled spaces, and everybody's talking very quietly. I mean, that's just one little thing. But certainly how they spoke about the works were different from one to the other, and I wondered about that. So I started making projects around museums, because I figured if the museum's manipulating artists, I wanted to be part of that manipulation. I should also say that in my college museum, to support myself, was a museum guard. And years later, I made this work called Guarded View. It's the guard uniforms of 4 different museums in New York City. And I always knew I'd make this piece, but I also felt, knowing guards, that they were on display, but also invisible. And it was kind of a weird combination. And so that's really what this piece is about. And in fact, in many museums in New York, and I imagine elsewhere, the museums get a great deal of either tax deductions or what have you, because they have a large minority employment in the museum. But the minorities are not in the professional staff, usually, in New York City. They're in the maintenance, in the guards. So I figured I wanted to do a piece about it. Years later, after I'd made the piece, before I'd made the piece, I was invited to, and I was a fully working artist, I was invited by the Whitney to give a tour of one of their exhibitions. They're inviting artists to give tours of their exhibitions. And I said, well, I'll do it, but I'll do it if I can be in costume. And they said, oh, great, the artist is going to be in costume. I don't know if they thought I was going to be in a bunny suit or whatever, but so they agreed. And so I had lunch with the docents and some of the education staff, some of the people I'd known for many years because I was working in education in other museums. And so I said, at the end of lunch, I said, excuse me, I'm going to change my clothes now into my costume, and I'll meet you downstairs in the galleries. And they said, oh, great. So I went, and of course I know guards in many different museums because I used to work as a guard. So I borrowed a guard's uniform and stood by my sign that said, FredWilson Speaks, gives gallery tour. And I stood there, and all the people I had lunch with stood in front of me, milling around, waiting for me to show up. Yes, they did. And, and then I said, well, let's get this thing going. They were all very embarrassed that, I was standing right in front of them. But really, had it not happened, I would have been really surprised because you put on the uniform and you disappear. And so this was a performance I did. I walked through the installation, marking on the walls about the problems with the text. And because there were problems with the texts of this particular exhibition. And the crowd followed me around, and the people, public would look at this and wondering what this guard is doing, talking about these things. And all the guards came off their stations and said, I always want to say that about that thing. It was great fun. So that was called My Life as a Dog. That's why I love the Whitney. I mean, besides that, being a trustee, they are really open to a lot of things, and they've always been, and they're a great family of people. And the new museum is really the embodiment of this goodwill and really openness. It's embodied in the architecture. This is probably my earliest museum project. Well, this is not a real museum. This is a commercial gallery in Manhattan, and I basically painted the walls this color, as you see, a color like it up in the galleries. Yeah, this is a really old slide, bad color there. But anyway, it was a really nice color at the time. All I did was darken the walls, spotlight these objects, and people would get off the elevator, because in New York the galleries were in elevators in the 80s and the 70s. And they say, oh, I'm looking for contemporary art, and they get back on the elevator and they go away. Well, this sometimes is the problem that I have, but anyway, it's worth it. And here, as this piece is upstairs, I think there was some hostage crisis at the time when I was doing this project, but this image stayed with me. And I created this piece called Colonial Collection, basically masks from West Africa bound and gagged, but the label says Musée de l'Homme or British Museum. And of course, interestingly, people ask me, did the museum really give you that? Actually, Hans Hacke said, "Where'd you get this mask?" And I said, "Hans, I put that mask on. I made that, put that flag on that mask." Anyway, people believe what they read in museums. And so, in the case, as you see upstairs, there's Harper's Weekly from the various wars between the Ashanti and the Zulu and the British and the Zulu and the British, and these insect boxes with the names of various African countries with the label British Collection 1914. And I really feel that museums, especially with the older collections, and certainly there are still those that are like this, they bring these things to the museum, and this kind of environment, the aesthetic environment of the museum, anesthetizes the historic reality for these objects, and it makes you not even think about how these things got there. This mask I did absolutely nothing to, except change the label. Now, no museum in their right mind would have this label, and some people got upset at me because they said, "Oh, how could you do this with the mask of someone's private collection?" Well, it's my private collection, so thank you very much. The Smithsonian, in the one of the African galleries at the Smithsonian, it said Colonel there was an object with a sculpture, and it said Colonel so-and-so acquired this sculpture from the Zonga tribe. I mean, how does a colonel acquire anything when he's traveling through your town? So museums have whole host of euphemisms to cover up the messiness of history. This is another piece from another project that I did called, well, see now, these are so old I'm beginning to forget what they're called. Never mind. Primitivism, High and Low. That was the names of two different MoMA exhibitions at one time. Anyway, I had two different rooms, and this room was the ethnographic room, and the other room had the guards in it. And this piece of all these vitrines had these skeletons in them, and each one had a label. They said someone's mother, someone's father, someone's sister, someone's brother. The piece is called Friendly Natives. And I was really very struck whenever I give a lecture in a college museum and I see different collections that some colleges had, and anthropology department colleges, and they've studied these skeletal remains of native people, and then bring them into the museum. And once they're in the museum, they belong to nobody. The humanity is gone from them. And so this struck me. The display, the opportunity of display shifts this from being a human, a person, and becomes just an object. Now, I had been working on these projects in galleries and with making my own objects for quite a while. And at a certain point, you could see almost museum curators, a light bulb going off over their heads. It's like, wait a minute, FredWilson makes these fake museum spaces, and we're a real museum. So maybe we could bring him here, and we wouldn't have to pay for shipping, and he could make a show. Well, and it's true. Two different museums kind of thought to bring me to their museum to do a project. The first one was the Contemporary Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. They were a museum without walls, and they did projects with artists all over Maryland. And they thought if I came, I could pick a museum and do a project in one of the museums in Baltimore. And so I went with them, with the director, to different museums in Baltimore, and just to meet them and talk with them. And basically, I was checking them out to see if I wanted to work with them. They had no idea. And I ended up deciding, going to the Maryland Historical Society, which is this. Looks like a historical society in many parts of the United States. And I went in there when I felt really uncomfortable in the space. So I thought, well, why do I feel uncomfortable? This is American history. I've seen objects like this before. Why would I feel uncomfortable? This is where I need to make the work. And surprisingly, the director of the museum said, yes, we'll let this artist make a project in our historical society. And I'm very grateful for him for doing that. I think he didn't have a major exhibition coming up, and he had a big museums conference, and he didn't know what to do, so I just fell in his lap, essentially. But it was a real risk. I don't think he even knew what a risk it was what it could have happened. So basically, I should say, this is Historical Society, and this is this was built as a contemporary museum. This is what happens if they hadn't really thought about display in a very long time, but it was a contemporary museum in 1850. So basically, all I did was look at every object in the museum, things that were on display and things that were in storage. And with old museums like this, things on display tell you a lot about the museum, but things in storage tell you even more. And really, this project was about the museum. And so I had to speak to everyone. I spoke to everyone, including the director of the board and the woman who cleaned the silver and the maintenance and the kitchen staff, the registrars and conservators, everyone, about what this place was about. And I looked at every object in the museum. I was able to do that, and because I had a year to work on this project. And it's from all that and talking to everyone that this project emerged, because I'm not from Maryland. I had the entire third floor to do my project, and I'd just be pulling things out to sort of arrange this display. And I really feel that my museum projects are, you know, they're installations. They just look like museum display. It's sort of the still life of a museum. It's not real. It's not a real image. It's actually my creation to look like a museum. It's about other things. Anyway, one of the first things I found was this globe. It was in their silver storage, and it was so unusual to me. It looked like something. It looked like a contemporary object, but it wasn't. And the word "truth" was across it in brass letters. So I thought this was a perfect object to have as you first enter my exhibition. Whose truth when you look at history? So where's the truth in museums? So this is how I wanted to put it, and I surrounded it with these empty plastic mounts, and there was a label that described the globe, which it was made in, I forget the exact year, in the 19th century it was made, but it was made as a trophy for truth in advertising, and you know, it came to the museum, and then of course people forgot about truth in advertising, I guess. But anyway, it's and the label, there was a label for the mounts too, which said plastic mounts made in 1970s, maker unknown. Because I wanted people to go through my exhibition and realize that everything, I manipulate everything, and that everything has history, even if it's recent history, and so it's all a part of this larger story. Well, actually, there was no name for my exhibition as you first walked in. That was the first thing you saw, and there was nothing there. And actually, as I was working this project, it was the director was getting, well, actually, it wasn't the director that was getting nervous. It was the PR department, because they wanted to sort of promote this thing. And I'm just looking at things and sitting in the president's office, which was my studio, and just trying to figure out what this project was. Well, anyway, the director was trying to help, and he said, well, why don't we call the show Museum Held Hostage? And I'm like, oh no, we're going to get along here. It's not going to be that. He was a little nervous. He was a little nervous about what was going to happen. I decided to call it Mining the Museum, because basically I was digging through things, and perhaps I was going to blow up some ideas about history. But more than anything else, I wanted to make the museum mine. And so it was from my particular vantage point that I did this project. And surrounding this globe were these busts. I hope, is this a pointer? Let me see. Where's that guy? No, it's not a pointer. Unless I'm pointing the wrong way. Anyway, I have these three busts, and the one on the far left is Henry Clay. The one on the far right was Andrew Jackson, not a favorite of mine. Now, this is the Maryland Historical Society. Everything in this museum supposedly has something to do with Maryland. In the center is Napoleon. Now, what he was doing in Maryland, I don't know. They don't know. It was just there. But I put him in there anyway. On the other side were three pedestals without busts. Since there weren't any busts, I put labels. Let's see, Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Benjamin Banneker, three African Americans, very important to the nation, all of them from Maryland, and nothing about them in the Maryland Historical Society. So my project was about not just what the museum collected, but what it didn't collect. And you know, what it didn't collect said a lot more than what it did collect. And for me, I mean, I could have collected incredible amounts of information about African American history because Maryland is full of it. But I really was interested in what the museum was collecting and why they collected it and what they weren't, what was their view of the world. And the only way to know that is to look at the collecting patterns of the museum over the years. Because certainly the current curators, this was not their view of history. It was a collective history that developed over the years that was given to them, and obviously they weren't even aware of this. So, you walked around, a lot of reading between the lines in this project. Next door were these cigar store Indians. Now, every museum has them. They're a little embarrassed about them. They don't know what to really do with them, but they are beautiful sculptures as carvings. And so I pulled them from all over the museum and put them all together and have them facing the wall. And the label says, Portraits of Cigar Store Owners. And the one on the far left was actually sculpted by a German immigrant of his daughter. And here we have, this Fräulein in brown face. But anyway, what they're facing, I asked the curator if, I wanted to meet the Native community in Maryland because the Native communities are in all these cities around the country. And she said, well, there are no Indians in Maryland. I said, oh, really? So I found the Native community, borrowed photographs, family photographs, and historic photographs, and that's what these figures facing away from you are facing, so you could see these photographs. I don't know if I have another image of it, but let me see. Oh, no, I don't think I do. This figure is standing in front of a map of the Chesapeake Bay, which is right there near the museum. And it was from the previous exhibition, which was a duck decoy show. And the curator was very unhappy with the show, but it was a trustee who put her up to it, so she had to do it. Anyway, a lot of ducks. But anyway, so they had this map of the duck hunting clubs on the map. And I left it as even putting something from recent history. I just add the native tribes onto that map. And they had, Benjamin Latrobe, a famous architect and, collector of things, gave to the museum this huge collection of arrowheads. And so I put them all out in the case, and the label said, a collection of numbers. And I moved paintings from other parts of the museum to this space, and that were hanging elsewhere, and because something disturbed me about them. However, there's one label that, one painting that was not on view. I actually asked them, if they had a Rip painting, and I said, every museum has a Rip painting, certainly old ones, and so I had my choice in this place, but they don't like to let you know that they have Rip paintings that have not been conserved yet. So anyway, I borrowed this Rip painting. You see it, it's kind of hard to see here, and unfortunately, I don't have a good picture of it, but on the far right is a picture of this 19th century white gentleman, and the Rip was across his face. And so what I ended up doing was making a videotape of the maintenance man, who was African American, and he spoke through the image. So you had half the painting face and half the video face speaking to you through the image. And he would say things like, "No one knows I'm inside of you, except Mama." Things like that. I have great stories about that particular piece, and I'll tell you this one. All the curators came out, because what happened with this project, it changed a lot of things, and really was quite fascinating within the museum what happened, because it made people have to talk to people they normally wouldn't talk to, it destabilized the museum a bit because they didn't know what the public was going to think, and so they all had to kind of try to deal with this project that was put upon them. Although I tried to speak to everybody, they all knew who I was, so that people didn't think I was going to make fun of them. That's usually what happens with museums. They think I'm going to, that it's going to make them look bad, but it's not about them. It's about the combination of history throughout that museum. Anyway, the docents at the museum, which I felt really, felt for, because they were the ones who had talked with the public, not the curators, about this project. But apparently, the docents stood in front of this work here with the video coming through the face, and they said, there were 4 or 5 of them, and the curator was behind the wall hearing this, saying, well, they were just upset about, well, why do we have to talk about this project? I mean, this is about, passing for white. That's how they viewed this project. Why would we have to talk about this? These young kids are not going to be able to understand it. It's not going to be, it's not really, it doesn't make any sense to talk about it now. That's an old thing. And one of the docents said, well, I'm African American. And, they didn't know, and I didn't know. He's, a very light complexioned man. He lived in the black community, but when he got to the museum, he became a part of the museum and didn't have a reason to talk about it. And actually, everybody who came to the museum left who they were outside the museum to take on the mantle of this particular, storyline within the museum. In fact, this museum, well, I'll continue before I say this. So all the other museums, all the other paintings, I pulled from other parts of the museum. And this one, there are 7 children in the painting. This is a dark slide, I think, yeah. But there's one child at the lower right. That white is his collar. And one child in the upper left in the doorway. You see his shoulder, his arm, the shoulder. So there are 7 children in the painting. And all these paintings had a black child in the periphery. The label, where it was in the other part of the museum, listed all the children in the center, but not these children in the periphery. So I did some research and found out their names, because this historical society had a big library and archive. So it was easy to find out the names, so they could have done that had they thought of it. And so I decided not to put the names on the label. I decided to leave it as it is, and have, as you step in front of it, a light to illuminate all the children, including the 2 black children. And then I did audio tapes with black children from Baltimore, because they have a very specific accent. And they would say things like, "Where's my mother? Who calms me when I'm afraid? Who washes my back?" Things like that. And so each painting, as you stepped in front of it, would say something. This one, this painting was right by the front door, and the director said, I never noticed that black child in that painting. Now, I think that's a stretch. I can't figure that one out. I just cannot. He came in there every single day. I don't get it. I don't get it. But, you were not meant to see these children. The museum focused your attention on the elite of Maryland. You're supposed to think about the elite of Maryland, and not average Marylanders, not immigrants, certainly not the black population. And museums are great silencers of dissent. They can focus your attention, and you don't even know it. And you don't ask the questions because you're not even aware of how the environment is affecting you. And the labels say one thing, but the environment is telling you a lot more. So anyway, he hadn't seen him before. But anyway, that was him. But we moved the painting, and when we got up close, we realized the black child had a metal collar around his neck. This is a 17th century painting. And, the black child has the bird, the white child has the bow and arrow. He's sort of like the golden retriever for that child. The voices on this painting said, "Am I your friend? Am I your brother? Am I your pet?" And, in the horrors of slavery, he could have been all 3. This painting, in 1850, people were not naming paintings, giving them titles. So the title on the wall when I first saw this painting was Country Life. It's by a painter named Ernest Fisher. But since Country Life probably was not, created by the painter, someone else, made either the collector or the museum decided to just, this was what it looked like, so they called it Country Life. Someone else made the title. So I figured, well, I can name it too. So I left the title on one side of the painting, and I added my own title on the other side of the painting, and I called it Frederick Serving Fruit. It just so happens my name is Frederick. But also could have been Frederick Douglass. He was from Maryland. Anyway. Now, this museum had most incredible repoussé silver in their collection. And, you know, museums have really, you know, you'll have a museum for all the beauty of the museum, and then of our culture, and you have a museum of the horrors of our culture, and this is true everywhere around the world. But rarely do you have all that in the same museum. One affects the other, and one is the reason for the other. And here, and of course, since this museum was, you know, basically was about connoisseurship, things were described just basically for how they looked. I left the kind of labels that they would have. I also did, and this was called Metalwork 1793 to 1880. And of course, in the ledger books, I also found slave shackles, and certainly whose labor, you know, who had to serve the silver and whose labor supported wealth that could produce the silver, and who could have made those silver objects in apprenticeship situations at the end of slavery. So I felt once having these things in the same display case really brought out another part of that history that nobody particularly wanted to talk about, and it was just by putting these two things together. And here under the heading of modes of transport is, in the center here you have the sedan chair of the last royal governor of Maryland, and a painting of who was carrying around that sedan chair. And then in the background you see the display case. There's a ship, a model ship called the Pride of Baltimore, and the ship, they have a full version of it in Baltimore Harbor. And beneath it are these basically the galleys and listings of you know, livestock and things that they were bringing on the ships, including slaves. And then these two baby carriages under the heading of modes of transport. However, I found this Ku Klux Klan hood in textile storage, of course. I could almost, you know, I really got along very well with the curator. The only way I get to do what I do is because I get along with everybody really well. It's not about them. It's, you know, these things are there. They know they're there, but they, you know, I'm not bringing something in from the outside. It's there. You know, but I can almost hear her say, twisting her pearls, saying, "Oh, he found the Klan hood." Oh, God. But, you know, they were really great. They said, "You want the Klan hood? You can have the Klan hood." And I put it in this baby carriage. And on the wall was a photograph of black nannies with white babies. And certainly just the whole notion, for me, the notion of just these ideas, these racist ideas come at an early age and they're placed on the child. It's like, and of course the material was the same material as what was in the baby's linens there. Interesting thing happened with this show. The show opened for the American Museums of American Association of Museums, a national organization. It opened, and the director, I think, smoked more cigarettes that morning than I'd seen him smoke the entire year I worked on this project. He was a little nervous, but it went very well. People really liked the show. It was the big, you know, it's a big deal. And after the show was supposed to be up for only for a few months, but the show stayed up for a year, and then actually for a couple of years, and basically it came out in the New York Times, and 50,000 people saw this show. And so they thought that the staff asked if they could bring, you know, it was coming down, but they asked if some smaller portion of the show could be reinstalled, be up for a longer period of time, and the director said sure. And so they particularly asked for this particular image, this baby carrot, to be in the show, which I thought was amazing for a historical society to deal with this. But I would get calls from the education department from time to time, and one time they called, you know, just to talk about the exhibition and what to do about certain situations. And one time the educator called me and said, "You know, we have a school group coming in, and some of their parents are in the Klan. What should we do?" So we had a great conversation about it. I don't remember what I said. I know what I do know is I said, don't give out my telephone number, otherwise. But so it was really, the museum kept this project up for many years, and dealt with whatever issues came up around it. But I think the great thing about museums and the great thing about this particular museum was that it's a safe space for unsafe ideas. That's what I like to believe, if you do it right. And here in their cabinet making storage, this is called cabinet making. There I found these chairs and I put them in an arrangement that I felt was kind of like different members of society. And then in the basement there was this big wooden thing lying there. I said, what's that? And the curator said, oh, that's the public whipping post. We got that, they used that until 1958 and then we got it. I don't know what to do with that thing. And I said, well, I know what to do with that thing. Anyway, so for me it was this gruesome thing, it's sort of a little crucifixion scene for me. And in the children's area, I found this doll's house. And, at this point, the staff sort of was figuring out as I was pulling things out where this project was going. And one of the docent who tended to the doll's house in the children's gallery said, oh, not the doll's house, is nothing sacred. She said that, she really did. Give me that doll's house. Because, you looked in the doll's house, and I brought the docents to look at it as a way to kind of get them to sort of think about it, when it was where it was in the children's area. You look at the doll's house, and the female doll was in the kitchen. The white female doll was in the kitchen. The black female doll was in the bedroom. No, I think it was reversed. It was reversed. The white female doll was in the bedroom. The black female doll was in the kitchen. The black male doll was standing by the door. And the white male doll was sitting in the parlor. So I figured, here are all these very stereotypical arrangements just there for children to absorb uncritically. And I'd asked the docents, where were you in this house? And a lot of them just kind of balked at it because one said, well, my family came here in the 20th century and we're not around for that. And they had their discussions about what they thought I was trying to get at, and they talk about this. But really, what would happen was they became less about this collective view of being an elite in the museum, and more of who they are outside the museum, and which was kind of the point of that little exercise with them, to sort of become who they are. Anyway, I took the doll's house and, did a little something to it. You looked in the doll's house and there was overturned furniture and there were bodies lying around. And then I found this other black doll and put it into, a larger black doll, and put it into the space, into this the parlor, if I can get it to, there we go. And because in this archive they had a little book a diary by a lady who remembered Nat Turner's rebellion. And she talked about it in great detail, and so this became a diorama to her experience with that. One kid said to me when looking at this particular little room, he said, oh, that's Super Slave. It wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but it's art. You can sort of take it where you want to take it, but it wasn't horrific. The last galleries of this project were objects that I found in various parts of the museum, like a basket, a ceramic pot, a wooden object. And they're beautiful, and I'd been looking at them for quite a while, and I decided, and there was some little jewelry in their storage rooms, and I looked at them for a long time, and I asked them about them, and they said they didn't really know much about them. So I did a little research, and these were African-made, or Africans who had just come to the United States, and they were really beautiful, simple objects. And so I made a display just of those objects, because after all this kind of the history of abuse, and violence, I wanted this cultural production that still, after all that, that still was retained in these objects. And of course, they had no idea about what these things were. They were just sort of used as in kind of diorama settings of the, the kitchen or what have you. And so it turns out many of them were the earliest things from Africa in the United States because they came with missionaries and various other expeditions. So the last space is this space that you see. It is, there's a book on the table that was quite important to their collection. It was the only object of African American history that was of importance that they had. And it's a book by Benjamin Banneker, who was a free black man in the 1700s who surveyed Washington, D.C. for Thomas Jefferson after L'Enfant died. He was a mathematician, and he was an amateur astronomer, and he made this book of the charts of the eclipse of the sun and the moon, and he gave it to Thomas Jefferson. And that was a great thing, great inspirational thing to have as the last room. On the wall are these images of the eclipse of the sun and the moon that cycled through. And what this woman is reading are copies of what he wrote in the book, which were his strange dreams, and also who tried to kill him, and because being free in the 1700s wasn't all that free. And then this computer, I mean, that's like a museum piece now, also, that old computer. But anyway, I researched the star dates and put that on the computer. And the last image on the wall was the first line of the letter to Thomas Jefferson, which said, "Dear sir, I freely and cheerfully acknowledge I'm a member of the African race." And I thought, wow, for a 17th century man to say to the President of the United States, that's an excellent way for me to end this project. And it was this project changed my life, changed my career, because 3,000 museum professionals saw it in 3 days, and the notions of this went all across the country, and so every historical society in America was inviting me to their dungeons. I decided I couldn't handle that, and I just wanted to get away from those kind of environments, and worked at various other museums with various other kind of collections, and I've been doing that since 1992 around the world. I don't know where we are here. I talk too slow, tell too many stories. But anyway, I'll show what I can show. This is a more recent project. Again, it's, I should say that it seems that I'm highly influenced, or it's usually about African Americans, but it only is when that subject is what speaks to me. When I was in Poland, there weren't any Africans anywhere to speak of, and certainly not in their museums, or Sweden, or wherever. And the projects vary, and all the time that I do it, they say, "Oh, I don't have any slave shackles. Come on in." And then, of course, I find out what the largest thing that they were not talking about, screaming at me, and then like, "Oh, it's about us." So it becomes very personal, but we all get along really well because it is an exhibition after all. It's going to come up and come down, but the lingering conversations between staff and between the public and the institution is what really is the important thing for me. And I should say that one other thing I have to say about this particular project, Mind the Museum, was that one museum director said to me at the opening he had never had an emotional experience in a museum, which I thought was pretty sad. Another one said to me he walked through the Historical Society, and just so it was a regular old Historical Society, then he went up to my exhibition and walked through my exhibition, which he thought was highly subjective. And when he walked back down through the museum, he realized how subjective the museum really was. And for me, this is all about point of view and being able to see what you're actually within and how it's speaking to you, what it's doing to you. So my project is just a way to elicit seeing the museum, seeing the reality of the rest of the museum. Anyway, that was that project, and I'll quickly try to talk about. Oh God, this is terrible. I'm just keeping you hostage here. But anyway, this is a more recent project, and so things have shifted in the way I'm working. Of course, I'm an artist, and things are going to shift. But this is in Savannah, But again, this is another one that came to this subject matter. Obviously, Savannah is a highly historicized environment. And this is the museum, the Savannah College of Art Museum, which is new, which I thought they did a great job using an old building, old railroad station, and infusing it with a contemporary museum. So you see both, which makes it work pretty well in Savannah. It had they brought me down to, because this African-American collector had African-American art collection, and I'm not particularly interested in making a regular art exhibition, but I figured it's unusual for me to actually work with a collector. So I went to his house and saw the collection that the museum had of his. He had a special room, and he had Jacob Lawrence and various other things. But as I began to talk to him about his artwork, he was also really excited about something else. He had a collection of letters and an archive, huge archive of writing, everything to do with African Americans. He had letters by, what can I say? He had, you name it, anybody of note since the 1500s, if they wrote something down, he had it and signed by them. This is not by an African American. This is by Napoleon to Toussaint Louverture. Basically, he wrote, Napoleon wrote to Toussaint Louverture to say, come on to France. We like you. Come in. Anyway, this is a letter by Malcolm X on the Hajj. Frederick Douglass, one of his letters. And so I got very excited because I don't like just to work with art. It's about the combination of things. And I thought the letters and the artwork, this was where I was going to do this project. Never worked with material like this. So I made an exhibition of the art and all these this written material, and basically became a kind of a pairing and discussion between what was written and the images. And because this is all African American, this history of this struggle, never mind if it's Alice Waters or Alice Waters. I just changed her entirely, didn't I? Alice Walker, thank you. And, Sojourner Truth, just kind of across history, kind of the things and notions they follow this path. And so in the space were these tables of these subject matter, particular subject matters, one about revolt, one about, kind of a poetic one, and various travel, and with artwork. Now, I should say that when I first went to this museum, the curator said to me, I said, this is an incredible old building. She said, oh, yeah. Well, this whole building is made of slave-made bricks. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. And so the project, for me, that was a really important moment, and I knew where this project was going to go. Because right near that they had a plantation originally where all the bricks were made for the entire town, and on this one plantation, and even the enslaved people who made the bricks lived in these brick houses that they created on the plantation, and then so all around the city, this particular gray brick you find, and it's actually more expensive than normal brick now if you find them, not because it's historic, but because it reminds the folks of old Savannah, and they are pretty bricks, so they put them in their gardens and little walls and things. But if you go on one of the tours, there is a brick in a wall that you see a thumbprint. So it's quite Savannah is a spooky place anyway. But this is as much as I love Savannah, but this was just what I needed to sort of really make this project. This is the building before, and then they created this space in it. And so basically there was brick and objects. This was about revolt. Here's sort of a listing of all the kind of bricks used in Savannah, including Home Depot brick, and the last one is the slave-made brick. And I use brick throughout, sort of enclosing, making barriers, enclosures, and walls and such. Because in the background is the building peeking through in this white room gallery. And these sculptures are by, there's an exhibition of art, and basically I kept them, kept the artwork. This is by Elizabeth Catlett, and surrounded them, some things with brick. These are not the slave-made bricks. I couldn't afford that many of these because these are just, bricks from ruins, more contemporary ruins. That particular piece is by Aaron Douglas. Go Down Moses is the name of that. And this is another work by Richmond Barthé, and surrounding it, and behind there's not only this sculpture by him, but letters from James Baldwin to various people. And this particular image, kind of, someone said it was a sort of an existential piece here between the letters and this enclosure. And so it continued around the room like that. This table, I included this huge table in the space because at this collector's home, Dr. Walters, Dr. Walter Evans, he got so excited he'd bring these books out. He had these boxes made, really beautifully leather-bound boxes, and he'd pile them on the desks for me to look at, and it was like in the canyons of these boxes, opening them up and with a great flourish, and I'd see this incredible letter or book that he had, and so I was sitting within it. So I decided to reproduce this whole scenario, had these boxes made, but in these boxes, in my boxes, were not letters. They were slave-made bricks. There'd be one in each box. So literally, you hold a box and they have the weight of history in them, but nobody got to lift them as just. And this is how they would be labeled in his collection, and these are mine. I really like this. I'm going to just sort of flip through, show you some of these, but I'm not going to talk much about them because this is a painting, because I could go on and on, but this is a painting by an artist, Frederick Duncanson, African-American artist, and put it in this sort of tableau setting, creating a home setting for this particular painting. I thought that trying to recreate an African-American home, not that these would be in an African-American home, but the environment, trying to place it in a place and a time that would be not necessarily a home, but something revolving around a tableau about these subjects. These are all from his collection, too. And the artist himself, this is just boy fishing, but in fact, the artist was a very light-complexioned man, and so I always thought maybe this could have been a portrait of himself. He didn't say so, but it could have been himself in that painting. And so I created the tableau in that regard. And beneath it, I placed this 1920s little magazine made in Harlem magazine for young artists called Fire. And in front, I placed these bricks down in this kind of pattern, and these are slave-made bricks, and they sort of meander and snake around. And I started this big project to find out the names of every enslaved person on that plantation who made bricks. And I was going to inscribe them on these bricks here, and then place them in the wall as the building was still being built. But it was extremely difficult. I was not able to do it in the time frame. I also often think that would be a great project at some point, to try to resurrect the names of these individuals. The project was called Life's Link, and that title came to me from this little tiny autograph book, which is just a little tiny autograph book that he had in his collection. That was Frederick Duncanson, the painter's book, and he had people that he met would write their names in the book. But then I found this little picture in the book, really small, image is really small, and it seemed like something from like a surrealist kind of image rather than a 19th century artist. And beneath it said Life's Link, and I just thought, well, this is the perfect title for this project, because the linking of all these, the art and the writing, these African individuals and their, across history, linking them together. So that's the name of that. And, you know, I do have other things, but I think maybe I should I end it here?